It's currently 8:20, and
Yeah, we still talk
the
about that tour.
RTM
That was a
F&B
good
meeting
thing. You're
is
welcome.
now back in
Yes, you
session,
do know.
and
Yeah,
I'll give
people,
it to you, now that it's 8:21. You can reconstitute your session.
Yeah, Mac Patrick, Chair of Public Health and Safety. We have a quorum here. We're all set.
We're all set. Okay, so we're here to discuss the fire engine. And I know there's a lot of information that was handed out. There was a detailed package. I will be honest that F&B is going to do the introduction. We're going to talk about the finances. Before we even get started, I want to compliment the Norotan Fire Department. You're going to hear that fire engines are supposed to be replaced at a certain cycle. Since the pandemic, fire engines are taking longer and longer to build. I'm not even getting into that, they cost more also. What Norotan did is understand that it's a 900-day delivery for a fire engine. So rather than waiting for that fire engine to be beyond what its supposed to useful life is based upon the standards that are out there, they're doing it now so that we will get delivery of that around the time that the fire engine is now beyond what its life should be. So I think that that's an outstanding work from volunteers who have a great understanding of what needs to be done for this town, besides their normal work. But the amount of work that they've put in to detailing, outlining, and other things I'm going to allow them to talk about. But just that planning is worthy of note to start this meeting. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to the chief, who can explain fire engines, which is everybody's fun thing to sit on.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Brendan Keene. I am the chief of the Norotan Fire Department. With me tonight is our first assistant chief, Bobby Bush Jr. He's also chairman of this committee. It's a 7-member committee. We put it together about 2.5 years ago. We've explored all sorts of options for refurbishment or replacement of the existing Engine 32. Engine 32 is a 2002 Marion rescue pumper. It's an apparatus that is utilized first due, meaning it responds first for a whole bunch of different calls, primarily car accidents, car fires, carbon monoxide, water rescue, elevator emergencies, pretty much everything that's not an actual structure fire, meaning a house on fire. Like I said, it's been about 2.5 years of putting this committee together. We've had lots of meetings with different potential vendors. We met initially with the current manufacturer of the current Engine 32, which is Marion. They're a U.S. company based out of Wisconsin. We met with them. We discussed options for new replacement versus refurbishment of the current Engine 32, and had long discussions about that and the process and what we would end up with if we refurbish the truck. The ballpark price we got for refurbishment was about $550,000, which was, is a significant discount to the cost of a new engine. But the biggest issue with that is you're still stuck with an engine that is essentially 25 years old at the time of replacing some of the body components. So at that point, it's really not appropriate to, extend the life of that truck. It's really throwing a lot of money after something that's only going to be around for a few more years. So we switched tactics and we started to talk to different vendors about replacement completely. After about 1.5 years of that, we've come to the conclusion, for a variety of reasons, that the best fit for the department, best fit for the town moving forward is to go ahead and purchase another Marion. We really like the current truck and its setup and the way we utilize it at Norotan and town-wide. And for those reasons, we're really building a truck that's not that different. It's got, all the new safety features, and it's going to provide a much more safe apparatus for our crews to arrive on the fire scene. It's got newer warning light packages that'll provide better protection on scene. But the nuts and bolts of it are pretty similar besides that. It's going to have a little bit more storage for equipment, allowing us to bring more equipment to the scene faster right off the bat. and it's also gonna have a little bit more water, so it's gonna allow us to have more water on board for fire extinguishment. So, that's really where, I guess that would be a good background of where we're at and the truck we're looking to replace. I don't know
Can
if
you also add, I know that in your Board of Selectmen, and Board of Finance, you were talking about the timing to make sure that the engine.
Yes, great, thank you, Jack. So, as pointed out, we're trying to move ahead here so that the truck is replaced in a timely fashion, so that at the 25-year mark, when this truck is supposed to come out of service, we have a new truck in town, or just about here. The other advantage of moving forward now is a cost savings to the town of $55,000 potentially. Clean Air Act, EPA, every few years they come out with a new version of it, and for better or worse, there's always changes to the type of motors that manufacturers can use, and the different setups you can have in these trucks. Currently, the motor we would want, which is a smaller block motor, it's a Cummins L9, is still available and not illegal to use according to the EPA. If we do not move forward in the near future, potentially as soon as February or March, all those motors are going to be used up. There's going to be none available in the market, and they're not making them anymore. So the only available motor will be a Cummins ISX 12. It's a much larger motor. It's too much horsepower. It's not what we actually need. But the EPA said, well, that's what you have to use because it's the best thing for the environment. So with that separate motor that's too big for us and wouldn't be perfect for us, there's also $55,000 additional because it is a larger motor. You need a larger transmission. You need all that stuff. So I've been assured by the factory, this is our fourth Marion. We have a very good relationship with the manufacturer and with our local sales rep. They have promised me that if we can move forward in January, they have one squirreled away for us, which is tremendous, and it's what we want to hear. The other thing is, fire manufacturers, I'm sure you guys have all heard, as the Heights and Darien have come through as well, fire trucks are just increasing in price, like it seems like daily. All manufacturers are telling us anywhere 3 to 5% quarterly, 10 to 20% annually is still the price increases that we're seeing. Marion was kind enough that they said, listen, there's a price increase that's coming January 1st, but we'll hold your price through the end of January as long as we have a signed deal by the end of January. So if we don't move forward now, not only we're jeopardizing and taking the chance of having a motor that costs more, $55,000 right off the bat, but you're looking at a 3 to 5% increase on top of the numbers that are in there. So time is of the essence here, unfortunately.
So just so that everybody understands the process, I believe the Board of Selectmen has approved this appropriation at their last meeting.
Correct.
Which was, I believe, Monday. The Board of Finance is meeting on the 16th, and we're meeting on the 22nd, which would still provide enough time for them to sign the contract. There was one other thing, and I'm not sure that I heard this right, but based upon the roads that you're handling, is the size of the truck going to be a little bit different for maneuvering? Or?
It's going to be a very similar build to current Engine 32. We build all of our trucks in Norotan, thinking specifically about our district in general. Our district has Salem Straits, parts of Delafield Island, a lot of down in the bay, a lot of tight streets that require high levels of maneuverability. We also build all our trucks to have a clearance of under 9'10" so that we can clear all the bridges in town. Like Jack said, Engine 32 it's going to be about 6 inches longer than the current one, but in the 25 years since the old truck was built, the advancements in technology of cramp angles and engineering, it's incredible what the trucks can do now. So yes, the truck is absolutely designed thinking about how driveways are getting tighter, stone pillars are getting bigger, houses are bigger, the common obstacles that we find all the time going to calls.
What I don't know about fire engines could, fill a library, but a question, is there like a standardization among the moving parts in a fire engine, like hose hookups to fire, hydrants, whether it's here or if we had to go assist in New Canaan or in Stanford, like, is that all baked into the modern fire engine?
Yes and no.
Are we compatible with other parts of Darien and communities around Darien with this new truck?
So the entire town of Darien is compatible. All of us run the same threads. The hydrants are all the same. There's no, threads on couplings, hose couplings and stuff like that. Hydrants are all the same. Townwide, everything's the same. However, town to town, you can have differences. So we do carry adapters for things like Rowayton. So like our engines carry a Rowayton connection in case we have to go to Rowayton. It's a different size hose, different size thread. We're able to connect to that. Same thing with Stanford, Norwalk, New Canaan. The different towns we would go to, we have adapters for those kinds of things, and vice versa. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
We can assist if needed.
Absolutely. And, you know, it doesn't happen a lot, but we do have the ability to go there. I mean, the tankers run mutual aid to New Canaan, Rowayton, Highway, there's interaction as well. Why, yeah?
So what do we do
Go ahead.
with the old engine? Is there a trade-in? How is it accounted for? When we sell it, is it revenue? How does this work?
I can answer the accounting. I'll allow him to answer what the market value is.
So, again, you're talking 2.5 years from now, so it is a kind of a difficult thing to put a number on. There's absolutely a value to it. You know, worst case scenario, you have a scrap value, but it's worth more than that. There is a used fire market out there, but it's really a niche product, and then especially the way we build fire trucks, specifically in the Northeast, because, you know, we deal with old roads, low bridges, stuff like that. Where out in the Midwest, they can build a truck that's 100 feet long and doesn't need to turn, it doesn't matter. They really can. I mean, I lived in Ohio for a while, you can do that. Here, so there is there's a restricted, pool that would be interested in our truck. Moral of the story, I've done some research online. I've also spoken to a couple brokers about it, mainly the guy that is hopefully selling us this new truck. You know, the ballpark value on it, $20,000 to $50,000. There's not a lot of resale value.
The accounting for that, which I can tell you, is that upon the time that we sell it, we do not budget for the sale of assets unless we know it well enough. But it is sold and goes back into the general fund.
Any follow-up questions to this?
Yeah, in the past, we've donated fire trucks to towns that didn't have the ability, there not enough people in the town to be able to afford the fire truck. We donated the last fire truck to a town in Maine. Any reason why we wouldn't donate this fire truck to a worthy cause?
Because they're a tax offset for doing so, maybe?
We're a non-taxable organization, so are they. But I will say that decision is probably outside of their decision, and I would expect the Board of Selectmen to get involved should we be donating. I can't guarantee that, but it's not their decision because it's
Yeah,
really our
Christine?
asset.
Yeah, we don't own the truck.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the new motor that you, in this truck that's smaller but it's going to be obsolete, they're not going to make it anymore, you said. Is there any problem with if there's the new motor that you get in this truck, if something fails in the motor and parts, will they be able to get parts or what?
Yes, absolutely. So it's not obsolete. It's not that they are not going to support the motor any longer. It's just that they're not allowed to put it in a new chassis. So every truck built after a certain period will have to have this new motor in it, and it's strictly a date thing. Cummins isn't telling you they want to get rid of this motor. It's strictly the government saying they can't use it anymore. They are absolutely going to continue to support it. It's a motor that's widely used nationwide, and actually the only reason they're still available is because the motor freight carrier, one of the main reasons they're still available is, was it Yellow Trucking was the name of it, I believe, that just went bankrupt. They would buy, tens of thousands of trucks a year, and they had these motors, and because they went bankrupt and they're not taking delivery of trucks now, there's a surplus of motors still out there.
Yeah.
That's one of the rationale I've heard on why, because 2 years ago, we were told there's no chance we're getting this motor. A year ago, they said probably not getting this motor. And now, as we've come to the final numbers and we've come to the different boards to talk about it, they are still some available. So now it's like, let's go get it.
And anybody who's gone to Napa understands that these fire engines, even though they say for only 25 years, last for much longer than that. And they continue to make the parts because it's even more lucrative than selling the fire engine.
Thanks. So,
Yeah.
sorry, you sort of alluded to this maybe just prior, but my question was who actually does own the engine? You said it was not your fire.
Yeah, the town of Darien owns all the fire apparatus in the town of Darien, with the exception of, I believe, one engine, but it's not my department, so I'm not gonna talk on it. All of Neuron's fire apparatus are owned by the town of Darien, with the exception of the boat and all the small vehicles. So the chief's cars, the utility trucks, the actual corporation, the Neuron Fire Department owns them. All of our apparatus are town assets.
And you actually see the difference if you go on a tour, which we've done pretty much annually, of the 3 fire departments, which is really good and actually filmed by Channel 79. The difference is that if you look at the license plate, you can see which is a municipal plate and which isn't. And the ones that aren't are owned by the station itself.
Got it, sorry. And so just a follow-up, regarding your committee or commission that is formed to do all the research you've done for tonight and prior purchases, is that like a standing committee or commission?
No. So-
Or you assemble that when the need arises?
That's correct. So each apparatus gets its own committee. It's a joint venture between myself and the president of the company that put together this current committee. I will say that a lot of the committees overlap because the guys that are interested in replacing this type of committee and have the experience kind of stick around. We have a 7-man committee, like I said. 6 of the individuals have been on committees before. This is my 5th, I think, 4th or 5th. I know Bobby's been on 4 or 5 as well. And you know, typically it's the senior members of the department. So we have of the 7 on there, 4 of them are either chiefs or past chiefs, and then no one's, you know, wet behind the ears. They're all experienced members.
Sure, and I definitely appreciate that. I ask because I've been involved in the RTM in this committee for just over a year, and this is the second such request that we've seen in that time. My question would be about the committees as they're formed. Do you guys forecast? Do you look ahead? I'm just curious what the frequency of these requests might look
Sure.
like. Do you have an idea about that?
Absolutely. So actually, the fire commission is who kind of outlines and projects that apparatus replacement schedule, which every year when we submit our budget to the town, we give them an updated apparatus replacement schedule. So I'm happy to give you a copy of that. I'm sure you could get it from the Board of Finance or anyone else as well.
The easiest place to get it is Bob Bush in Town Hall. That's where I get it all the time. So we do plan from a town and from the Board of Finance as well of looking ahead for what fire engines we have to replace. And it's one of the reasons why F&B led the movement, instead of accruing for these, which would have been monies of significant, to start bonding for it for 2 reasons. First of all, the people that are getting the use of the engine are actually paying for it instead of people who might never see the engine. But the other thing is we do have a replacement schedule for every one of the fire engines and fire apparatus that we have in town. And it's updated with new estimated costs, which is very frightening.
Yeah, correct. It's a 30-year projection as well. It's way out there. So, you know, every type of apparatus in town has an expected lifespan on it. And every truck in town is listed on there and when we expect to at least start to consider replacing it.
I figured there was more context, I just didn't have it, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I just
You
have
had
a quick question. Is the appropriation amount include the $55,000 delta? So we're asking for that, even though you think.
We're asking for the worst-case scenario so that we did not have to come back for
That's fine.
additional
Yeah,
funding.
that's fine. I just wanted to know if that.
That was what we were
amount
talking
was
about
in
on
that.
the way down.
Okay.
Yeah, Lois?
Do the other departments in town have similar equipment to this, and where are they in their lifespan?
So, I mean, this is a fire engine, so this is like, you know, the Ford F-150 of the firehouse. It's the most generic, everyone has one. Yes, all three departments have fire engines. We're all set up a little bit different depending on district and the way we utilize the truck. Like I said, this is a rescue pumper, so it's kind of a cross between some rescue equipment and firefighting equipment. All three departments have a truck set up this way. So Darien has engine 41, the Heights has squad 21, and we have engine 32.
Do you know
So
how old those trucks are?
21 is 2 or 3 years old, Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2018 is a good guess. And 41 is 2006, I believe.
Yeah,
That is coming up on the schedule in the next few years, but I'm not the chief of Darien, I'm not gonna speak for him.
and the other thing to remember is that each of the fire, even though I joke that the commission is created by the heads of the three families, each of the fire departments are their own separate entity. And they tend to get equipment for what they need in their district. And maybe the one exception is, you know, a number of years ago, we just did the rescue vehicle. That was in the Darien Police Department. And that's one of the engines that most probably go to a lot of the accidents in town. So that's probably the most expensive of, even though similar engines or equipment is in the other fire departments. That one had probably a little bit more bells and whistles that you're gonna see in the other houses.
And that's used on 95 as well.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Rescue 44 is Darien's rescue that was just budget, or, you know, approved for replacement. And the Heights and Darien primarily cover 95, so they have, you know, different equipment than you would see on our rescue, which is set up for both, you know, car accidents on the post road and small roads, and sometimes backup on 95. But that truck also carries a lot of water equipment because we cover all the water in town, so.
Now, from a payment perspective, it used to be, back in the day before the pandemic, that you'd pay 25% up front when you put in the order, and you'd pay the remaining 75% when you got delivery. Things have changed. So now I believe it's 25% when the chassis is completed, or?
So for this specific truck, it's, they are going to look for $420,000, approximately 1 year from when we sign, which is the completion of the chassis. So that's when the motor, cab, and chassis are actually assembled at one plant and then brought to the plant where the body's put on. At that point is when they look for that first check. The rest of the check wouldn't be due till the truck's actually delivered and sitting in our firehouse.
So nothing when you place the order?
No.
No. And that also means that when we're talking about the various bonding aspects of this, that the bonds will not be issued until we have the fire engine in-house. So once again, while we're approving 1.1 and change of an appropriation and approving the authority to bond, we probably won't be putting this out into market for another 3 years to affect what we have. So this will be authorized, but not outstanding until delivery. So that gets sort of important when we're looking at this. Again, the estimated cost of bonding over 20 years will be approximately $77,000, and that includes both principal and interest.
So Jack, this gets wrapped up with a larger bond.
Yeah, we won't bond unless we have $5 million going out to market at any one time. So it's too expensive to do it otherwise. And so you may see little parts of it, you know, depending upon what the cash flow is. You may see the 425 being wrapped up into another bond issue that we're doing. But the lion's share of this isn't gonna be until it's in-house and christened and everything like that, that it's now here. By the way, I should also say, which one time I'm gonna ask one of the fire departments to bring in, this is not a simple design that these departments do. It's over 150 pages. I joke that they even tell you what type of screws they want in their fire engine. This is,
Stainless.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's, how many pages was this analysis?
I mean, when it's done, it'll be 150 pages easily, for sure. And that's, there's 2 books. You'll get a chassis book, you'll get a body book. Yeah, they're in depth. The Jack, says about the screws. That's a real thing, about what type of screws are in there, what thickness plate you're using. There's a lot in there.
And the bolts are working.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is, by the way, I've requested rules for Brendan to come back to us in probably April, because any of you who have traveled to Great Island in the tour and heard that the fire engine is over there, this department raised privately over $600,000 over 5 years.
You're talking about the boat.
Yeah, to buy a boat. And I just thought it'd be nice, even though there's a film on it, that we hear about how this interacts with the other communities, what's on this boat, everything that they did, because it's really just an outstanding effort for the community. And I think it's important that we understand how they interact on the boat with Stanford, Norwalk, and the Coast Guard in that. So, just a little aside. Is there any other questions, or is everybody ready to vote? Okay, I'll take a motion from F&B to move this. I'll take Peter as moving and Bill as a second. All those from F&B that's in favor of this, please raise your hand. Assuming that I see no votes, I'm going to assume that this is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll take a motion for public health and safety. Rachel, second. Christine? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That's me. Okay.
So you guys get to do more steps, because you get to go to 119 and we get to stay here. Brendan, thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you very much, folks.
And I have to, any bonding.
You could potentially bring off the actual line.
Right.
We can get going on the next thing. Let's see what we got done. We got done that. We got done that. We did that. Much better. We did this. Okay, so we're gonna we're gonna continue on the rest of our meeting so we can move forward. The next thing that we have on our agenda is the tax assessor sends out a form to all the commercial owners of real estate that are renting, and they have to have that form legally 45 days before June 1st in their possession. We've been doing this for a number of years. An income and loss schedule is provided back to the assessor so that we can determine, the town can determine what the assessed value of that property is, and it's based upon the rent rolls, the expenses, and other things along those lines. We've been doing it for a number of years. We also get a pretty good response. Unfortunately, the law, which is, I believe I've sent that out without my glasses, I won't be exact, but I believe it's section 12-63C, thank you, says, and I'm going to use the right words, if somebody does not hand in their financial statement to the tax assessor by June 1st, providing they've received it based upon most recent court cases, they get whacked, that's the term that I've been told, with a 10% increase in their assessed value. So if you consider some of the rentals that we have here, and you're adding 10% to the assessed value, you are also adding a significant amount of tax. The current tax assessor does not have the authority to waive that penalty for good cause. And they can give extensions if they need to. This is an authority that, based upon my conversation with Wayne, our town council, that approving this resolution will mean we do not have to write a new ordinance to give this authority, that this resolution alone will give the authority to the tax assessor to ensure that there's working condition, and allows Tony Himicki, who, if you haven't met, is outstanding. And this town's very lucky to have him as our tax assessor. He can then work with the owners of the commercial real estate property to ensure that we're getting the appropriate reports in at a timely basis. And so that's what we're doing. We're giving him a tool to work with. Now, like anything else, when we're doing some authority similar to this, we have to remember that it's not going to always be Tony, or, no different than we may not have Kate or Jen or Ed Gentile. And so we're not talking about an individual, we're talking about a position and what's going on there. And based upon their discussion with the Board of Finance, we're going to handle it very similar to what the tax collector does, is periodically, if we have things that have been outstanding for a long period of time, we do write it off of our tax rolls, even though we may continue our collection process. And that gets reported to the Board of Finance on an annual basis. If you're asking what penalties we have assessed to date, to the best of our knowledge and based upon a conversation I had with Jen, our finance director, we have not assessed the penalty to date, all right? But this, by giving him the right to waive, is also giving him the right to do it. So it's a double-edged sword. So that's basically the resolution that we have in front of us. We're the only committee to report on this. Is there any questions? Nick, go ahead.
I had a question. Does this somehow also relate to, sort of the annual assessment of, sort of lower income housing units? I thought I had heard something about when there's lower income housing units that landlord has to report every year so the town can track and make sure that it still qualifies correctly.
That is part of where we have, that's part of with the 830G in our reporting on how many units we have and looking for moratoriums, which we've been good. And there's certain zoning laws that now say that if you're, I'm going to give an example. If you're building a unit with 50 units in there, we're requiring 10% of those units to be affordable housing in that unit. And there is a provision that if, and again, I attend a lot of meetings. P&Z is not one that I frequent myself at, so I will do my best effort. But we do allow that if you're not building in the 50 unit, you're not building 5, you may only do 4, they have to pay into the town the cost of what it would be to build one of those units, which makes those funds available to the town for other projects that the town may go for. But in most cases, our builders are going at 10%, which is greater than what our current stock is. We also may be the only town in the state to have received more than one moratorium on this. We've received 2. So, in that regard, we've done a good job from a town-wide perspective.
Jack, if a principal of a commercial building doesn't, provide his financials within that time frame, why would we, do a resolution to waive the 10% penalty on the assessed value?
We're giving the tax assessor the opportunity to waive if he feels that there's extenuating circumstances. We're not saying that anybody who doesn't give it in on time, we're not going to charge. So there was a recent case that Tony shared with me that I believe it was in Middletown, which was just finally decided in October. That's part of this first was presented to the Board of Selectmen in September. That's why if the document that you see the memorandum from our tax assessor was dated September 17th. But there were two cases, one in Greenwich and one in Middletown, that were in the courts at the time, so we were waiting for the answer on that. In one of the cases, a commercial owner was assessed a penalty, and they were able to prove that they did not, beyond a reasonable doubt in the opinion of the courts, that they did not receive the form. This isn't a form that somebody goes on. It's the responsibility of the town to provide the form and have them receive it 45 days. So the town has to take an action, and we're good in doing that, but it is for, somebody may be a new owner. And so they weren't aware of this. And also in the case it was mentioned that not all towns provide this form to their commercial landlords on an annual basis. And so the company that was in court has 6 different towns that they deal with, and 2 of them don't do it annually. So it's not something that they would go, oh, it's June 1st, I'm supposed to have had this in, or it's April 15th and I should have gotten a form. So it does put some onus on the towns in order to ensure delivery. This allows him to work with those owners, and I'm sure if they're not handing it in or they're being obstinate for whatever reason, then we will see a 10% penalty being assessed.
And what is submitted to determine the assessed value? Are they audited financials, or are they business tax returns from the previous tax year? How are we determining what their cash flow is?
It's interesting. I have a copy of the form and I can distribute it. I think I did in one of the packages. It's an interesting form because this is a government form. And if you're found that you did not properly fill this out, there's some greater liabilities than the 10%. There are some real legal aspects to it, and in fact, the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, goes and says that that you are legally liable to fill this out, and so they're really attesting that these are true in documents. Now, I don't know if we're going to audit them. I don't think that we do.
You used to say trust but verify, right? So.
Yeah. No, I agree, but I'll have to ask Tony on that. But considering the number of units in pending towns, I don't really believe that we're going out and auditing them. You also have to know that some of the builders that we currently have with First Federal or David in the Corbin projects, they've been doing this for years, and they're not going to be playing those games.
The likelihood of inaccuracy is low.
Yeah, yeah. So it's more or less to give him a bargaining chip. And to start, especially since we've had a plethora of new units that are entering our town. So
This will make you not have the right to do that now, to assess that penalty if someone is late?
I think he has.
Okay.
All right, we haven't done it because we also haven't, we haven't given him the authority to waive it, okay? And so that would mean that if it was challenged that I assessed one and I waived the other, it wouldn't be good in court because, what's the legal term you use with arbitrary and capricious, or is someplace along those lines. This gives him the authority to go and waive, which before he didn't have. So it was hard to assess some and not others.
It's actually good to codify that. I mean, it's what we would call in the law equitable power,
Right.
equitable authority.
So that's what we're in fact granting to him.
But to be clear, he does have the power to assess the penalty now if someone's late.
He would have to assess the penalty to everyone who was late.
He's required to. He can't
You're right.
waive any.
Right. And so because he's waived some for good cause, those who were late, who probably should have been assessed, he didn't have the authority to charge them and waive others. This gives him the authority to do that. That's why it's good having two attorneys in this group. Any other questions? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Can I have a motion to approve? I have Peter, I have Bert as the second. All those in favor? Good. Well, that gets us on to the Board of Ed. So, I just had an email that was dashed out late last night that now says that the board, the RTM Education, RTM F&B, and the Board of Finance are invited to provide questions or comments on the budget at a special meeting of the Board of Ed on January 18th, which sort of changed what date we're going to be doing our next meeting. We will have a virtual meeting on January 17th. We're back to not seeing each other, kumbaya. We will do virtual because we have to address the 3 HHR projects and the union contract for the administrators. I chose not to add this to this meeting because some people work and we shouldn't be here to 1 o'clock in the morning. So we'll take those up separately. But since that meeting's, the addition to this bonding and the adjustments to those 3 bonds that we approved is significant enough that I decided that it was not in the best interest of this committee to vote on it prior to the Board of Financing voting on it. So we will be addressing this a day after the Board of Finance. I mean, if this was just the fire engine for $1 million, I wouldn't have minded of getting ahead of the Board of Finance. The addition to HHR is not $1 million. So we'll be meeting on the 17th on the virtual. I'll get out that on another special meeting. I've had a conversation with Beth, and I'm interested to hear everybody's opinion. I know I'm sending you a lot of meetings. I'm going to be, there was just some responses. They met again on Tuesday. Part of that meeting is scheduling. The other part is that. I'm behind in looking at that meeting. Beth was following it, but I think your comment that at 9 o'clock it didn't have any wings that it was going to end.
It looked like there was no end date in sight,
So
let me watch the rest of the year.
yes, that's exactly. So I'd like to give from this committee, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts on their budget. One of the things that we discussed with the Board of Ed last year is F&B really didn't ask a lot of questions compared to some of the other questions that they were being asked, not only during the meeting from the RTM, Board of Finance, and the 2 parent groups, CPAC and the CSP. So we sort of held off. I also like to stay within our lane, which is you may or may not agree with what some of the education solutions are, but we deal with finances. And that's not within our lane to say, oh no, you should organize this way or that way. So, but I do want to come up with a high-level area. Now, the two things I mentioned to Beth, and then I'm going to be quiet, is that I do like that we had a preliminary view that was done by Rich Rudel. Actually, there's going to be three things. I like the fact that in this year's book, they looked and did a projection of what the next 5 years, so if they're at 6% this year, you should look at that book because they're at 7 next. And the other thing that we will comment, but I'm making it as a separate comment, is that their increase of 6.19 is actually higher because they moved $150,000 of something that has historically, since I've been around, and actually since the time of the dinosaurs, been considered operations, and there's no rationale to have moved it into capital. In fact, there were 3 other items in their budget, all of which sitting in technology, that were of equal or greater amount, and one of the technologies actually qualified for what the town defines as capital, which is being over $5,000 in cost and a 2-year life. And while it may meet the 2-year life as these desks at $150 a piece, I don't care how many you're buying, that doesn't qualify. There is an exception that the town has agreed to, is that when we're buying radios for the police or the fire departments or even for the schools on a replacement schedule, we have always treated that as a capital investment. All right? So I have expressed myself to Dr. Adley and to the chair of the Board of Ed. I was going to be there Tuesday, but decided that with 3 inches of rain, it was much better to watch it at home. So I did not make my public comment, but we will be commenting on that this truly belongs in operations. And if they do need 1,000 desks, which is 2/3 of their total, it's up to the Board of Ed to make a determination of what that amount should be, not the RTM. So if they keep it in capital, then for those that are new, we can cut their operations budget as the Board of Finance can, but it's a dollar amount because what we're approving is a full appropriation. So if they wanted to buy 1 million crayons, and we thought they should only buy 500,000 crayons, and we cut it by $100,000 of we perceive the cost of those crayons, they could still buy those crayons because we're approving a total appropriation. Things change when you bring it to capital. We do have line item veto, as does the Board of Finance, on all line item capital, regardless if it's the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen. And I'm not saying that we're cutting. It's just a different animal, and it's not one that I want to have discussed on the floor of the RTM, besides the fact that it doesn't belong there. So what I'll do is go around the room, and people can give their comments on what's there, on what you saw on the budget. I don't know if you want to relate what Malin has talked about or feel that's unfair.
I'd rather, I mean, Malin had very specific points, and I wish she could have stayed because.
We're going to go over this again on the 17th, so that you will have an opportunity if you're not caught up in watching that. I will say I do watch meetings, and I find they're very good if I'm having difficulty falling asleep, including my own. So, go ahead, Peter.
I agree with you. It was startling having this come out at 6.19, 6.2. And without any discussion beforehand that this might be the direction that we're going. We had talked, I think, last week about wanting to have better communication about where the budget direction is going to be, what the theme of the budget is going to be. And I did like the fact that that Richard Rudel put out the 5-year projection, because it does go up more next year, but then it does come back down substantially which I think reflects the teacher's contract, which we all voted and approved. I mean, I look at the budget basically being not the 6.2, but the difference between the 6.2 and the teacher's contract. That's the area that we should be focusing on. I was surprised at the drastic changes in the administration, the approach to the school administration. And while I fully believe that we need to stay in our own lane, and you're not getting involved in substance and policy, it is impossible to divorce policy and cost. Because if your policy is to do X, Y, Z, one way or the other, that has an impact on cost. So it's, I think good communication would have liked to see better communication as to where we were going on this earlier in the process.
I also, if you don't mind, as we might know, and I'm gonna state this first, and then I'm gonna ask you to make a comment. One of the things that is occurring in our school district is that we're having a greater number of students identified with needs. All right? Now, some of that is due to gaps that might have been created due to the pandemic. Fully agree with that. But there's something else that hasn't been stated probably or articulated enough. And that is the same way that medicine has evolved, that we now have cures for things and new medicines and the science of medicine, identification of people along various spectrums, whether or not speech, language, autism. I have a bipolar son that I've mentioned, who was identified in 5th grade. Used to be that you didn't identify them until they were 18, 19 years old, and typically when they attempted suicide. Scientific identification is partially responsible for the identification of students with greater needs. And as somebody said to me, it isn't something that we should be concerned about, it's something that really should be celebrated. Because if our goal is to give an opportunity to students to perform at their best, and when you can identify a need sooner in their educational process, which allows you to provide the tools and other things necessary to allow them to have a successful education career or an opportunity for them to have that, the sooner we identify that, the better it is for the student. And actually it saves us costs down the road as well, because you're not dealing with the psychological and other things that I know I'm smart but I can't perform. So that's the other thing that I want to state, and it's not based upon my own experience. It's something that I had said at a Board of Ed meeting 15 years ago, that our development of science is identifying, and that's also part of the reason why we might be seeing some higher. We also live in a very well-educated, affluent community that has resources, and therefore people can identify things sooner and have the resources to identify it, which may not be as identifiable in other communities that do not have the resources or the education that towns like Darien or New Canaan might have. So that is part of the growth. Now, that being said, we did have a lot of outplacements, unilateral. And I want to bring you back to your comment, Peter, that you made at that meeting, and ask you to make it here as well.
Well, I can't remember if it was.
The one about Brenner and...
Right, well, I remember when, so this goes back to, I don't even know the year, frankly, maybe 5-6 years ago, and when, there's a discussion on the board about the cost of outplacement, and why is the cost, our special ed costs going up so much, and there was a lot of discussion. This was really a dire situation, because it involves such a chunk, huge, I don't remember the percentage, it was 30% the budget. Somebody said, I think mentioned that.
We were up about 10 to 15 million on outplacement costs.
So, I had an immediate flashback to a budget hearing, might have been the Super Saturday, when these things were being discussed, because at that time, a number of years ago, we were in an actual crisis with our special ed program here. And superintendent had been relieved, been replaced, and new superintendent Dan Brenner, I thought took what I thought was a courageous approach to how to handle this. At one point, people were arguing about how we should be doing, why certain things were being done in the school budget in a way. And he basically cut everybody off, stood up, and he said, we have to, the only way to bring the cost down is to be able to provide these services ourselves. If we continue to outplace everyone, the cost is going to continue to rise. And so our job is to build these capabilities here within the district. And he was very candid. I think it was courageous to say, for the people that have already gone to outplacement, who have been let down by our district, we're not going to bring these people back. Our job is to build trust with the people that are coming in, and over time, that cost will go down. What I said was, I'm hoping that we're still adhering to that approach to dealing with this issue. And I had some assurances that, afterwards, off the record, that there were. So, but I was startled to hear the same debate about the cost, outplacement, and what they were doing now that we had like 5 or 6 years ago.
And while we can't prove it, part of the outgrowth of what Dr. Brenner was talking about is Fitch Academy, where we're dealing with students in-house who might otherwise have been outplaced for whatever reason. And so that's, and yes, there's a limit on how many students we can take in, and that varies from time to time, but it's whether or not we're bringing in the right dyslexia training, whether or not we're bringing in other types of things to educate and provide the professional development to our educators in order to resolve some of these things in partnership. And so that's why I wanted it to say, because ultimately that has to be the solution again.
Jack, as a rhetorical question, if we ever had, with the number of students that are at Fitch, have we ever done a cost comparison of how much it costs per person, per student, to run Fitch versus if they were being outplaced?
I don't think we have.
It'd be a really good, probably very probative number.
Because there was always people who debated whether or not you could prove what this one was. But needless to say, Fitch Academy has, in at least my personal opinion, and believe me, I watch every penny, has saved this town significant money and actually did a great service to the students who have gone there and graduated. And the response from parents who's had students there is probably a better testament than any financial analysis could be. But that's my own personal opinion. But as you guys know, I don't spend money easily. So when I'm making that compliment, it's there. Beth, do you want to give your?
My biggest takeaway from Super Saturday is that after last year, where certainly the Board of Ed wanted to make sure that we weren't having like the deep policy conversations during budget season when there's a deadline. You know, like you have to make this decision because you're voting on the budget for it, so the decision has to be made within the next month, that they wanted to have the conversations throughout the year about the policies that the district is thinking about implementing, so that during the budget season, you're just talking about the budget piece of it rather than like whether or not the policy is a good policy and is what we should be doing. In some cases that has happened over the course of the year. I felt like there were things in the budget that I either go to or watch almost every Board of Ed meeting, and there were things that surprised me when I started looking at the budget. So I would just like the to be able to have all the conversations about whether or not policy is a good idea, whether or not, like, the administration, like, what the goals are of the administrative reshuffle, how they're going to be pursued, how this is the right solution. All of that is something I think we need to have a conversation about in October or November and not in January.
And that was the communication I was referring to before.
Yeah. Anybody, Bert, I know that you put up with
Well,
most of that from
I
online.
was always looking at Board of Education, the part of the Board of Education budget that deals with special ed,
Mhm.
because it's the heaviest part. When you look at the calculation that they showed, how they get to the 6.19%, 2.3% is coming from special education. That is not 2.3% more for special education. It is just overall, out of a $121 million budget, 2%, 2.3%, whatever it is $2.7 million. And that's on top of other monies that are being spent. And I want to make sure that this is spent wisely. I'm not there yet because a lot of this has to do with restructuring. And since I'm around in FNB, and that's 8 years, 9 years almost, we're always dealing with special education and some new ways to approach old problems or approaching new problems, and it's always about restructuring. Every year we add more staff in the on the administration side. The costs are going always up. There might be very good reasons for that, but I haven't understood what the intent is of the restructuring. And I was best on that because if you look before, there wasn't really much discussion on any of this. The Board of Education seemed to be surprised that this is coming up. And now we're supposed to deal with it. It's just it opens a Pandora's box when these things are sprung on you without having any advance notice. You're not prepared. I got all this stuff now, the responses today, okay? That's huge. You know, how are you going to deal with it? And there's nothing before where I felt there were discussions going on at the Board of Education how to deal with restructuring the special education. We're going back years, and it's always subject number one is always special education. And I have not really seen any effort to save costs anywhere. I think the biggest effort ever made was the Fitch Academy. And that really, and you're right, Jack, that really does save a lot of money, I'm convinced, because I remember how much money it cost to put these kids outside of the district. So, can there be done more that can be done in-house with different means? I'm not there yet, okay? And I haven't gotten any leadership from the Board of Education that tells us, okay, this is what we really wanted to do in terms of the structure. So that's my comment.
I will remind everyone, this is still the superintendent's. I thought there were a lot of good questions coming out. And, you know, you're mentioning, I remember Katie said, the first time I saw this was when I opened up the book. So, and they actually get it in before the Christmas break, just so that they don't have a good Christmas. And I have to admit, I actually also get a copy of the book, as Ed Washeka does, and Jim Palin. It was wrapped in cellophane with a number of things that were said confidential, and so anything that was in that, seriously, anything hermetically sealed, I believe. but anything, and I had to have somebody pick up my book because I was at a 5 and 2.5-year-old Christmas concert, which was even more amazing, for my grandkids. And so she had to say, no, I'm not going to be looking at it, and I'm going to hear enough about the school budget afterwards. So, but anyway, yeah, it was, so I had a little advance notice of what was going on, but most of them didn't seem to have that knowledge. Is there any other comments for those who have followed? Nick, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, when I first looked at it, I kind of like what you were, I was kind of struck by how high it was. I said, oh, this seems out of line with the past 10 years. And I thought, oh, well, maybe it's just inflation, and so it'll be high, and maybe we'll not have inflation, and it'll go back to being lower. But I couldn't really figure out, you know, if that's the case or not, because it seemed like a lot's coming from core expenditures, which seems like they might be there. And then, you know, I haven't watched all of the Super Saturday yet, but, you know, some of it just seemed confusing to me. I remember a couple of years ago when they decided, oh, we're going to have all these department heads. And I thought that was kind of excessive, just because I felt like they have a whole bunch of teachers, they just rotate around and be the department head and teach a little, and, you know, we're going to have all these other people. And then this year it seemed like, oh, we don't really need it in languages anymore because, you know, it's the smallest one, so let's take that away. So that just seemed like a little weird and haphazard to me, and I couldn't really, you know, again, I like kind of what you said, I don't really know if it's better or not to have, you know, the educational setup, and, you know, there's people more expert than me at that, but it just sort of seems like there should be some consistency, and there should be some, you know, sort of thought about cost. I mean, part of it is, you know, if you ask somebody, do you want to do what's best for the kids? The answer is, of course, going to be yes. And, you know, is that 2%, 5%, 10%, 25%? You know, like, yes, we want to do what's best. But, you know, so to me, when I think about, oh, Darien, everyone always compares it to New Canaan. I look in the book, oh, they're cheaper. You know, they're doing it at a level, you know, more efficiently than us. Well, you know, is that something that we should be striving for? Because we seem to be a similar sized town, roughly the same amount of students, more or less, in the high school. But
And same performance of our students are very similar, where you map out where Darien kids are and where New Canaan's, both of them belong to Lake Wobegon, where all their children are above average. So, but yes, they're very similar in what it is.
yeah, so those are my, I guess, initial reactions or thoughts.
Anybody else have comments before I make some? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, my reflecting on 2 points here, and I share your same concerns, but observations. You know, my recollection is that the administrative reorganization is done because there's a higher, the existing process of dealing with the PPT process was overloaded, and they needed to find a better way to do it, and this is what they came up with. And again, I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head, but I mean, there is a substantial increase in the teacher salaries, which I think is warranted. It's what we all voted on, our committee and the entire RTM, and so I think that's that's probably the biggest chunk of what this increase represents.
Yeah, I look at the budget a little bit different. And that is, while we are giving significant increases to the teachers, at least in the past, there was always turnover, and therefore we're replacing some more experienced teachers with teachers at a lower level. We're not getting those lower level teachers to replace. And please understand, we are fully aware that there's a national teacher shortage, and there's a teacher shortage in the state of Connecticut, and we're not immune to that. So that it's getting more and more difficult. But in the past, where you would go and get rid of a grade 20, and you pick up a grade 8 or 9, I'm making up what the lower grade might be, there was substantial savings. But there's still going to be turnover. And so we never really get the full amount, and whatever that increase is, just say that it's that it's a 4% increase. The fact of the matter is that only accounts for 2.8% because they represent only 70% of the employees is 70%, and not all of our employees are teachers either. So it's probably at about a 60%, so we're down to 2.4. That still says there's a 4% increase. And I understand, and it was discussed, that our transportation's costs went up by 12%. The 5-year cost of the fact that Darien does not have a facility to park buses on during the course of the day, as well as having a workshop where they can fix on buses or where the drivers can park their cars and hang out in between. The estimated cost that Rich Riddle did, saying that over the next 5 years is going to cost this town $600,000 more than New Canaan, because they have a little shed where they have the people and they park at the high school, where we don't.
The dispatchers on.
That on site, yeah, which we don't have that capability, so we will pay more there. However, that being said, during the special ed presentation, which was a very good presentation, the expansion of ELP was not discussed. So going from 4 days to 5 days, not that I'm against that, it just wasn't discussed prior, and that was a good opportunity for the administration to provide the board with information for the board to vet. The whole reorganization, my concern is, well, I won't say what the solution and how higher education should be organized, because that's well beyond my expertise, even though jokingly my family business was education, based upon the number of, my parents were both educators, and many of my cousins and aunts were educators as well. While that might have been my family business, that's not my expertise. I will tell you what is. How you look at a problem, how you identify what the sources of that problem are, how you look for solutions for that, of causes, and how you work on the causes first, how you then evolve to what a potential solution is, and how that should be benefiting the educational environment of that, is a standard business practice of how you look at things. And based upon my own personal experience and what I did for a living, that is something that I do understand. And I just didn't hear the end result. I didn't hear how they were trying to deal with the individual problems that were causing this. So like on an assistant principal, yes, we're having more PPTs per student than the rest of our DERG, the other towns in our, what we're compared to. I didn't hear the reason why. Why are we doing more PPTs per student than our other communities? What was the cause of that? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Why did that occur? I didn't hear what other committees assistant principals are working on, because the concept was meetings. So are they meeting on curriculum? Are they meeting on other things during the course of the day, which is taking away their time from interacting with students? I didn't hear that analysis, and I didn't understand whether or not you need all the people that are currently going to that to do that. And as it was mentioned by more than one board member, I didn't hear how the reorganization makes us better. And that, you know, I'm not doubting that it does. And I think that that's part of what was being discussed at the board on Tuesday from the Board of Ed members. So I was concerned about that, just on, you know, we're empirical. Everybody in this room, we're empirical. We tend to like to know numbers and results. you know, and I'm going to joke, even our attorneys are empirical in this particular case. So I didn't hear the empirical coming from the administration. And so I didn't hear what the vision was. I heard these as being separate issues. I understood the reduction of teachers because that was an empirical analysis, even though they didn't show what the 7th grade, which is larger than the 6th and the 8th were. But I understood that. That was numerical. I didn't have the opportunity to do my test, which I've done in the past yet. But I'm going to give you some standard numbers on special ed, and they may be a little bit outdated from the last time I did this about 10 years ago. But the analysis used to be that a special ed student costs twice as much as the average student in the school. And students with high needs, because there is a differentiation between high need students and other students that may just need language or speech, and understanding that many students that are in special ed have more than one, there's categories, I believe there's 13 of them that's identified, that's reported to the federal government. Many of the high needs and even some of the low needs may need both speech and language or type of services to be granted. But high needs are typically 4 times the cost of the special ed student. So if our average cost is 20, then the average cost for special ed students should be 40, and a high needs could be any place from 160 to 200,000. Those are just some real high-level test numbers to see exactly what you're saying. Based upon the number of students we are and how they're split, is what we're spending on special ed reasonable? Without getting into the private, I don't need to know if one student has this or that, because there are some privacy and confidentiality. But those are some of the guidelines that we used to be able to do. So I think those are some of the comments that I have. Definitely, you know, the bone that I will be chewing on until they change it is the 150,000 that somehow ended up in operations, and I can see no rationale other than you wanted to lower what your operating increase was. But my comment is that if you're at 6.19 or 6.3, I don't really see much of a difference in keeping it in operations in that. So that's a bone that I will continue to pick. But yeah, I don't know that we have questions or want additional analysis at this time. I think that's consistent with the conversation I had with Beth, that we should keep it high level, and some of the comments that we've had here, very high level, appreciating what they did show. Here's what our concern is. And it's not that F&B needs to know what you're discussing, even though it has a cost. Look, this town has elected 9 Board of Ed members that I believe are qualified. And I want to give them the opportunity to have the biggest chance to vet, understand, and determine what they need to do on that board. And personally, I don't think that it's fair to the board to give them essentially a month, because you know you can get the book in early before Christmas break, but you're not coming back until the 4th. So you know that's not allowing them to vet and see what's going on. And yes, healthcare is up. We've looked at what the cost on the town is. That's just something that we have to accept right now. Yes, transportation is up, and there's not much we can do unless we buy someplace to put that going forward down the road. And I know that's been communicated from the Board of Ed to the Board of Selectmen. There are other things though. You know, when you're coming in at a budget like this, do you really not have to take a good look of some of the things that are core that you've consistently done? Do we need to buy all the technology equipment that we constantly buy. This may not be the year to do it. How much of we have teachers that have a desktop and a laptop. Are they both being used? Couldn't we get rid of one of them? And so that's a potential cost savings. So that's a core that maybe needs to be looked at a little bit deeper. We're offering some new courses this year, and while I'm a firm believer that we always have to reinvent and go for new things and develop what's going on, that this might be a good year to say, what are we really introducing? And even though you might call it a replacement course, is it this the year to do that? Should we defer it for a year only because until we see whether or not the reorganization, if that's approved by the Board of Ed, is generating the results that somebody wanted? So those are just my preliminary high-level views of this. I understand there's reason why it's up this high, but I don't believe that a 6% is, and 7% next year is a sustainable thing for the town as a whole, even though I'm a big supporter of education. I've always been that. But hopefully the Board of Ed has a big challenge to find what the right balance is.
Jack, I haven't heard much about artificial intelligence, but everywhere else I read that AI is the only way out for productivity gains. We will not be able to deal with inflation if we don't have means in the service industries to use AI. I have not heard anything in the discussions. There must be labs, language labs, one-on-one computer instructions. There's got to be some way to introduce productivity gains into the school system more than we are doing right now. But I don't really know. There's no special report on AI as far as I know, and how well it can be used in the district. That's something we should have an eye on.
Yeah, I will say jokingly that I'm happy that AI isn't around, because there's an old Woody Allen joke that when computers first came out, that he said that his father was replaced by something this big. So being a computer, and I'm not sure what I did for a living couldn't be done and replaced by AI. So I'm happy that I am not my children or my grandchildren right now. But yes, I think that's a good point to raise, that, hopefully the administration and the Board of Ed is looking at where some of the uses of AI can be used to better serve in helping students. So, that's the basis for it. Any other comments? Okay, I had two other things on the agenda so we can go home. I don't typically like keeping everybody like this late. One is we have to vote on our minutes from the last special meeting in December. Do I have a motion to approve? I have Louisa. Do I have a second? I have Bill in the back. All in favor of that, raise a hand. Thank you very much. The other thing is I'm still working on orchestrating the meetings that we will have. This honestly is the first in-person meeting that we've had in 3 years. I had to find out who I got a room from because it's changed in that time. I will have a schedule of what we're meeting on. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 17th, where we'll have the members of HHR in here, and we'll also have the Board of Ed to discuss the contract for the administrators, which is getting an equal raise to what the staff did. And then I'll have our regular meetings. They will be virtual. We have a couple people that are traveling who aren't here today simply because that, and Peter came back from a meeting in the city serendipitously where in the past he could have been participating and completing his job. So, yeah, and since that's your primary goal here, I appreciate it. But with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. I'll take Peter over here, and I'll take Beth as an all in favor, say aye. Thank you very much for putting in the time today. I do appreciate it. We're done.